My parents gave my bedroom to my brother, even though I still lived there. "You can sleep on the floor until you figure life out," they said. I didn't argue. I silently packed my belongings, then bought the house next door and built a swimming pool facing their window. The scent of my mother's lavender air freshener was the first thing that told me I was home. It was a smell I associated with childhood, scraped knees, and summer afternoons. Now at 29, it smelled like failure. It was an aggressive kind of clean, a chemical floral that tried to mask the scent of stale hopes and the quiet dampness of a Rochester, New York autumn. Returning to my childhood home after graduating from Berkeley with a master's in architecture hadn't been the plan. The plan had been a sleek glass-walled office in San Francisco, a minimalist apartment overlooking the bay, and a life built with my own two hands. But the 2008 recession had hit the construction industry like a sledgehammer to drywall, and my portfolio of thoughtful human-centric designs was now just a collection of pretty JPEGs on a laptop I could no longer afford. So I came home. The house hadn't changed. The same worn spot on the Persian rug where I'd spend hours building Lego cities. The same gallery of family photos marching up the staircase. A timeline of my own slow fade into the background as my younger brother, Blake, grew into the spotlight. My parents orbited around him. I made a deal with them, a tenant's agreement in my own home. $300 a month for my old room, plus handyman duties. It was a bargain for them. In the first month, I fixed the perpetually leaking dishwasher they had learned to live with, routed the bathroom tile, and wrestled the overgrown hydrangeas in the backyard into submission. I did it quietly and efficiently, hoping my competence might register as value. It never did. My contributions were simply absorbed into the house, expected and invisible. My father, Frank, saw my return as a validation of his own life philosophy. He'd been a high school football star, a local legend whose glory days were preserved in the amber of his memory. He'd taken a stable job at the local bottling plant, married his high school sweetheart, and never left. He saw my ambition as a fool's errand, and my return as its inevitable conclusion. "The world's a tough place, Sam," he'd say, not unkindly, clapping me on the shoulder with a hand softened by years of inaction. "Sometimes it's best to know your own backyard." He saw his past in Blake, the current star quarterback of his alma mater, and his own fears in me. My mother, Diana, was different. Her disappointment was a living thing, a vapor that seeped from her pores and filled the space between us. She was obsessed with the image of a perfect American family, a portrait she curated for the neighbors and her friend from church. Blake, with his easy charm, athletic scholarships, and predictable future, was the centerpiece of this portrait. I was the smudge in the corner she was constantly trying to wipe away. "We just worry, honey," she'd say, her voice syrupy with concern that felt more like judgment. "Blake has his whole future mapped out. We want you to have that same security." The implication hung in the air. Why can't you be more like your brother? The tension came to a head on a Tuesday in October. The air was crisp, and the scent of grilled meat from the barbecue my father insisted on, even in the chill, filled the house. Blake had just received an early acceptance letter from a state college, and the celebration was in full swing. My mother, flushed with pride and a second glass of Chardonnay, cleared her throat for an announcement. "We have some exciting news. Since Blake is going to be so busy with his advanced placement classes and college prep this year, we've decided to give him a little more space to focus." She beamed, looking around the table, as if she had just unveiled a Nobel Prize winner. "We're giving him your room, Sam." The statement landed with no fanfare, a simple declaration of fact. I waited for the punchline. There wasn't one. The clink of my fork against my plate sounded like a gunshot in the sudden silence. "My room?" I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. "I live there." My mother waved a dismissive hand, the diamond on her finger catching the light. "Oh, don't be so dramatic. It's just for a little while. Blake needs a proper desk and space for his things, you understand? So where am I supposed to sleep?" This was the moment where a parent might show a flicker of concern or logistical planning. Instead, my father chuckled. "A little hardship builds character, son. Built a lot of it on the team bus back in the day." My mother nodded enthusiastically. The living room is perfectly fine. We'll get out the old camping sleeping bag from the attic. It'll be like an adventure. It's just temporary, Sam, until you figure your life out. The phrase echoed in the cavernous space that had just opened up in my chest. I looked at Blake. He was the only one not looking at me. He stared intently at his plate, a faint blush creeping up his neck. For a flicker of a second, I saw a sliver of something. Shame, maybe. He mumbled, "I don't need that much space." But his voice was drowned out by our mother's cheerful insistence. "Nonsense. You deserve the best, honey. A king needs his castle." I looked from my mother's beaming face to my father's complacent nod to my brother's averted eyes. I was no longer a son. I was a problem to be managed, a piece of furniture to be shifted to a less convenient room. The king needed his castle, and the court jester could sleep on the floor. I didn't argue, I didn't yell. A lifetime of being the quiet one, the path of least resistance, had taught me the futility of it. I just nodded, the motion feeling jerky and disconnected from my body. I picked up my plate and took it to the kitchen, the warmth of the food I'd just eaten turning to ash in my stomach. Later that night, as I dragged my belongings out of the only room I'd ever called my own, Blake stood in the doorway. He avoided my gaze, picking at a loose thread on his varsity jacket. "You can take the good pillow if you want," he offered quietly. "It's fine," I said, my voice flat. He lingered, a clumsy, hulking presence in the hall. "I told her it was too much," he said, kicking at the floor. "And what did she say?" I asked, not stopping my work. He kicked at the floor. "That I shouldn't feel guilty for my success." I stopped and looked at him, then really looked at him. I saw the entitlement, yes, but for the first time, I also saw the weight of the crown they'd placed on his head. He was trapped in his own way, a golden sun in a gilded cage. But my sympathy was a shallow well, and it had just run dry. That night, I lay on the living room floor, the worn-out sleeping bag doing little to cushion me from the cold, hard reality of the floorboards. The scent of lavender was overpowering. Through the thin walls, I could hear the murmur of the television punctuated by my father's laughter. I was an exile in my own home, and as the cold seeped into my bones, it wasn't sadness I felt. It was something else, something hard, clear, and sharp. It was the feeling of a foundation being laid. Life on the floor was a lesson in degradation. I woke each morning with a sharp grinding pain in my lower back, and the feeling of being in the way. My sleeping bag, a faded blue relic of forgotten family vacations, had to be rolled up and hidden in the hall closet before my mother came downstairs, lest its presence offend her pristine living room aesthetic. Privacy was a forgotten luxury. I'd be jolted awake by my father heading to the kitchen for a midnight snack, his shadow looming over me like a disinterested ghost. The worst part was the sound. Sound travels differently when your ear is pressed to the floor. I heard everything. I heard my mother on the phone with her friends, her voice dripping with pity as she described my situation. "He's just a little lost right now," she'd sigh, a performance of maternal anguish that made my stomach clench. "We're giving him the space to find his footing." I'd lie there, motionless in the dark, and marvel at her ability to frame cruelty as kindness. One evening, I overheard them discussing finances. Blake needed a new laptop for one of his advanced classes. It was a top-of-the-line model, expensive and unnecessary. "Whatever he needs," my father said, his voice firm with a conviction he never used for me. "The boy's got a bright future. It's an investment." I thought of the $300 I dutifully left on the kitchen counter on the first of every month, money that was apparently used to fund the kingdom of the son who mattered. My existence here wasn't just tolerated. It was profitable. My days fell into a grueling routine. I'd escape to the public library, the scent of old paper and quiet ambition a balm to my frayed nerves. I sent out dozens of applications, tailoring my portfolio for each one, and received a trickle of automated rejections in return. Each "we regret to inform you" email was another stone on the wall they were building around me. But then a reply, not a rejection, but an invitation. Hartman Design Group, the most respected architectural firm in the region. The name alone made my heart hammer against my ribs. The CEO, Marcus Hartman, wanted to see me. I wore my only suit, which felt tight in the shoulders and smelled faintly of mothballs. I walked into an office that was everything I'd ever dreamed of, all clean lines, natural light, and the quiet hum of creativity. Marcus Hartman was an older man with kind eyes and hands that looked like they knew their way around a drafting table. He didn't just glance at my portfolio. He studied it. He tapped a finger on one of my designs, a community library I'd conceived for a low-income neighborhood. "You didn't just design a building here, did you?" he asked, his gaze sharp. "You designed a feeling, a sanctuary." "That was the idea, sir. Most young architects want to build monuments to themselves," he said, leaning back. "You want to build spaces for people. There's a difference." We talked for over an hour, about materials, about the psychology of space, about the responsibility of an architect to the community. It was the first time in months I'd felt like a professional, like a person with value outside of my ability to fix a leaky faucet. 2 days later, he called me himself. He offered me a junior architect position. The salary was $62,000 a year. The number felt unreal, a string of digits from a different life. I accepted, my voice shaking with an emotion so potent it felt like I might shatter. I hung up the phone standing in the library stacks and leaned my forehead against a cool metal shelf, just breathing. The first instinct was to run home to wave the offer letter in my parents' faces, a triumphant, "I told you so." But the thought died as quickly as it came. What would it achieve? A moment of surprise? A grudging, temporary respect? It wouldn't change the fundamental truth of how they saw me. It wouldn't erase the nights on the floor. The triumph felt hollow, a fleeting victory. I needed something more. I needed something permanent. A decision, cold and clear, settled over me. I would tell them nothing. The tipping point came that Sunday. My Aunt Carol, my father's sister, came for dinner. She was a no-nonsense woman with a keen eye for injustice, and she'd always looked at me with a warmth my own parents reserved for Blake. She walked into the living room, took in the sight of my sleeping bag stashed awkwardly behind a chair, and her lips thinned. During a lull in the conversation, she asked, her voice deliberately neutral, "So, Sam, are things a bit cramped here?" My mother let out a high, tinkling laugh that set my teeth on edge. "Oh, that's just Sam's little nest. He's our living handyman while he gets back on his feet. He's building character, right, Sam?" She winked at me, a conspiratorial gesture that made me feel like an accomplice in my own humiliation. The table fell silent. I saw the look in Aunt Carol's eyes. It wasn't just pity. It was a deep, profound shame for me and a burning anger directed at her brother and his wife. The public performance of my demotion was the final straw inside my chest. The hardening resolve fired into steel. That afternoon, while my dad and Blake were watching football, I saw it, the faded for sale sign on the lawn of the house next door. It was a sad, run-down bungalow, the paint peeling, the porch sagging, an eyesore people had been complaining about for months. An idea, born of pure, distilled anger, began to take shape. It was insane, it was impossible, and it was perfect. I excused myself, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm. I walked outside into the crisp autumn air and stood on the sidewalk between the two houses. One, the place where I was an inconvenience. The other, a blank canvas. I pulled out my phone and called the number on the sign. Later that evening, after my parents had gone to bed, I called Aunt Carol. "I saw what they did today, honey," she said, her voice gentle. "I am so sorry." "Don't be," I said, and the calmness in my own voice surprised me. "I think they just did me a favor, Aunt Carol. I need to ask you something. You've always been good with money, with planning. I want to buy the house next door." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then she said, "Good. It's about time. But Sam, a down payment, that's the problem." I admitted with my student loans, I have almost nothing saved. She was quiet for another moment. "You know," she said slowly, "your grandfather, my dad, he was a smart man. He saw things. He saw how your mother, well, he saw how things were." She explained that my grandfather had set up small accounts for all his grandkids, but for me, he'd done something different. He'd put it in a low-risk trust, with her as the executor, to be accessed only when I was truly ready to build a life. It wasn't a fortune, but he didn't want my future to be held hostage by my parents' whims. The knowledge hit me in two ways. First, a dizzying sense of relief. A path had opened. Second, a fresh, sharp pang of betrayal. My grandfather had seen my parents' favoritism, so clearly he'd made a contingency plan for me from beyond the grave, and they had never, ever mentioned it. Aunt Carol helped me connect with a loan officer at her credit union, a man named Mr. Gable, who had known our family for years. I didn't walk in with just a trust fund statement. I walked in with my new employment contract and a preliminary architectural plan I'd stayed up all night creating. I showed him how, with a smart renovation loan rolled into the mortgage, I could not only make the house livable, but dramatically increase its market value. I wasn't just asking for a loan. I was presenting a business plan. He looked at my designs, then at my employment contract, then at me. He saw a man with a plan, not a boy sleeping on his parents' floor. "The bank is betting on you, Sam," he said, shaking my hand. "Don't let us down." I wouldn't. I was no longer just building a house. I was building a case. And every nail, every plank, every tile would be a piece of evidence. My life split into two realities, separated by a thin wall of vinyl siding and a patch of crabgrass-infested lawn. By day, I was Samuel, the promising new architect at Hartman Design Group. I threw myself into my work, my mind humming with a clarity and focus I hadn't felt in years. Marcus Hartman became more than a boss. He was a mentor. He'd stop by my desk, not to check on my progress, but to talk about ideas. He saw the world through the same lens I did, as a series of spaces waiting to be shaped for the better. One afternoon, he invited me to lunch. Over sandwiches, he told me about his own start, working out of his in-laws' garage, sketching designs on the back of unpaid bills. "Everyone thought I was a dreamer with no prospects," he said, fixing me with his steady gaze. "The only person who has to believe in your blueprint is you, Sam. Everyone else will catch on when the walls go up." His words felt less like advice and more like a prophecy. They became my mantra. By night, I would return home to become Sam, the ghost in the living room. I'd eat the dinner my mother left for me, answer my father's perfunctory questions about my day of job hunting, and contribute my $300. I was a model son, a phantom of compliance. My exhaustion from my real job was a perfect cover for the lethargy and despondence they expected of me. But in every spare moment, early mornings before they woke, late evenings after they slept, and all day on weekends, I was next door. I had a key now. The first time I stepped inside as the owner, the smell of dust and decay was overwhelming. But to me, it smelled like freedom. I started with demolition, with a crowbar and a sledgehammer. I tore out the water-stained drywall and the dingy avocado green carpets. Every swing was a release, a chipping away of the frustration and humiliation I'd been forced to swallow. The physical labor was cleansing. I'd work until my muscles screamed and my hands were raw, then fall into my sleeping bag back at my parents' house and sleep a deep, dreamless sleep. For the first time in months, my friend from Berkeley, Sarah, was my lifeline. She'd drive down from Syracuse on weekends, a toolkit in one hand and a six-pack of beer in the other. She was a structural engineer, and together we were a formidable team. "This is the most elaborate, passive-aggressive I told you so in human history," she said one Saturday, covered in plaster dust, a wide grin on her face. "It's magnificent." She helped me with the load-bearing calculations when I decided to take down a wall between the tiny kitchen and the living room, creating a bright, open-concept space. She was the only person on earth who knew my full secret, and her unwavering belief in my crazy plan kept me sane. The house began to transform under my hands. I rewired the electrical, my fingers nimble and working with a confidence I didn't know I possessed. I learned to sweat copper pipes, the hiss of the torch a satisfying sound in the empty rooms. I hung new drywall, the process of taping and mudding the seams becoming a form of meditation. I was not just renovating a house, I was rebuilding myself. My parents remained blissfully ignorant. Sounds like the new neighbors are finally doing something with that dump, my father would grunt, hearing the sound of my saw. I hope they don't make too much noise. It could lower our property value. The close call happened on a chilly November Saturday. I was in the backyard of my new property, marking out the dimensions for the final phase of my plan. I was so engrossed in my measurements that I didn't hear my father come outside to rake the last of the autumn leaves. I looked up and saw him, not 50 feet away. My heart leaped into my throat. I dropped to the ground, scrambling behind a large, overgrown azalea bush that straddled the property line. My breath hitched in my chest. I watched him through the branches, his movements slow and methodical. He worked for 20 minutes, a lifetime, before finally dragging the bags of leaves to the curb and going back inside. I stayed hidden for another 10 minutes, my heart hammering against my ribs, the cool, damp earth beneath me a stark reminder of how fragile my secret was. The final piece of the puzzle was the pool. It was an extravagance, I knew, but it was also the entire point. It was the symbol, the full stop at the end of a long, painful sentence. I hired a local crew for the excavation, positioning the site with architectural precision. It would be perfectly unavoidable, visible from two specific windows of the house next door, the kitchen and the living room. The day the concrete shell was finished, I stood at the edge, looking into the smooth gray basin. It was a promise of cool water, of summer afternoons, of a life they couldn't touch. The end came on the first weekend of December. My parents and Blake were away for the weekend at his final regional championship game. It was the opening I'd been waiting for. With Sarah's help, I moved my few belongings. It didn't take long, a couple of boxes of books, a duffel bag of clothes, my laptop. My entire life fit into the back of her pickup truck. Before leaving my parents' house for the last time, I did two things. I placed an envelope on the kitchen counter. Inside were 3 crisp $100 bills and a short, simple note. Then I went to the hall closet and took out the faded blue sleeping bag. I walked to the center of the living room, to the exact spot on the floor that had been my bed for the past 3 months, and I unrolled it one last time. It lay there, empty and pathetic, a silent testament. I locked the door behind me and didn't look back. The family returned Sunday evening, flush with victory. Blake's team had won. They came through the door laughing, my father booming about his son's winning touchdown pass. The laughter died when they saw the living room. My mother saw the note first, her brow furrowed in confusion as she opened the envelope. I imagine her reading the simple words, "My rent for the month is on the table." I found my own place, Sam. Annoyance would have been her first reaction. The inconvenience, the drama. Then she would have looked out the kitchen window, perhaps to complain about the mess the neighbors were making, and she would have frozen. From my new living room, through the large picture window I had installed myself, I saw the moment of realization. I was sitting on my new patio, a glass of iced tea in my hand. The pool, filled that morning, shimmered under the newly installed landscape lighting, a brilliant, impossible turquoise against the gray twilight. I saw my mother's silhouette go rigid. My father appeared behind her. Then Blake, 3 statues in a diorama of disbelief. I didn't smile, I didn't wave. I just met their gaze from across the lawn and took a slow sip of my tea. It took them 10 minutes to storm over. They didn't knock. My father threw open the unlocked front door, his face a mask of thunderous confusion. My mother followed, her face pale with shock and fury. "What is this?" my father demanded, his voice echoing in the still, unfurnished room. "It's my house," I said calmly. "Your house? How?" My mother shrieked, her voice cracking. "You deceived us. You lied to us." I stood up, not aggressively, but to meet them on my own 2 feet, on my own property. "No," I said, my voice even. I was quiet. "There's a difference. You told me to sleep on the floor until I figured my life out. So I did. This is what figured out looks like." I gestured around the open, light-filled space, the smooth plaster walls, the gleaming hardwood floors. I'd refinished myself. "The problem was never the floor," I continued, looking directly at my mother, then my father. "The problem was that in my own home, I became invisible. You didn't just move me out of a room. You moved me out of the family a long time ago. I just finally got the message. I explained how I'd gotten the job, how I'd secured the loan, not with luck, but with a plan, with the skills they had always dismissed. This house, I said, my voice softening slightly, not with pity, but with the weariness of a battle finally won. It isn't about revenge, it's about perspective. I looked past them toward their house, dark and familiar. Every time you look out your window, I want you to remember, not to make you feel bad, but so you understand. You need to understand what you did. My father was speechless, the bluster gone, replaced by a deep, hollowed-out shame. He looked at his hands, then at the floor, as if seeing for the first time the foundation I had built. My mother opened her mouth, then closed it. The excuses, the justifications, all died on her lips, useless against the concrete reality of my new life. But it was Blake who broke the stalemate. He had been silent, his eyes wide, taking in every detail. He looked from my face to the pool, then back to his parents. The golden boy shine seemed to have vanished, replaced by a dawning horror. "Mom," he said, his voice quiet but clear as a bell. "He's right. What we did, what you did, it was wrong." That was the blow my mother couldn't deflect, the betrayal from her perfect son. Her king shattered her composure. She stared at Blake as if he were a stranger. He turned to me, his face earnest and clumsy with a new, unfamiliar emotion. "I'm sorry, Sam. I knew it was wrong. I was a coward for not saying anything." He then did something that surprised me more than anything else that night. He looked at the simple, unfinished wooden railing on my new porch. Can I help you sand that or something? I want to help." It was a clumsy offer, a foolish offer, and it was the most genuine thing he had ever said to me. It was the beginning of a bridge. A few weeks later, I ran into Marcus Hartman at the grocery store. He smiled warmly. "I heard you moved, Sam. A little birdie told me you're the new neighbor of the Franklins. I hope they're treating you well." He gave me a knowing look. "You know, Samuel is a great talent. He has a real gift for creating value out of things other people have written off." My mother was in the next aisle. I know she heard him. The social cost, I realized, was perhaps the one currency she truly understood. The seasons turned. Winter frosted the windows of my new home. I finished the interior room by room. It became a sanctuary, filled with light and books, and the quiet satisfaction of self-worth. Blake came over on weekends. I taught him how to use a power saw, how to properly measure and cut trim. We didn't talk much about the past. We talked about the future. We started building something new together. One evening in spring, as the last of the snow melted and the cover was coming off my pool, my phone buzzed. It was a text from my mother. "I'm making that beef stew you like. There's enough for you if you want to come over." I looked at the message for a long time. I looked out my window at the lights of my own home, at the life I had built. I looked over at the house next door, not a place of pain, but just a place. The anger was gone, replaced by a quiet, settled peace. I didn't reply right away. The choice, for the first time in my life, was entirely mine. They say family is the place you are supposed to belong, but sometimes you have to build your own house, nail by nail, to show them where the boundary lines are and to show yourself what you're worth. If you had to rebuild your own family from the foundation up, what would it look like?